So, what is the history of printmaking? As I mentioned before, I find printmaking very compelling because of its potential. And it is one of the mediums to me that has been able to impact people's lives, their social history, more so than many, many others. So, one of the things I had brought up is that this is truly an art for the masses or an art for the people, where if you're able to make multiple copies of something, you're able to have a wider audience and you're able to produce a cheaper product. And that's going to make art more accessible to people. As an art historian, I love this idea. I love this idea of putting art into more people's hands because art really has a reputation of being a rarefied object and museums being places that people are like, oh, I can't go there. That's not something that's for me. And for me, art should be about everybody. It should be for everyone. So I've always loved printmaking for being art for the masses, art that people can afford. It also is a huge driver of political commentary. And these are some pieces by Daumier. It's been a way for people to say, I don't like government. I don't like where it's going. I don't like the politics of this time. In a way that, again, is more accessible to everyday people. These are images that show up in newspapers and critique government. These are some pieces Daumier did about France during his lifetime. You'll notice he's not too complimentary about it. He basically says the king eats everything in his path and shits out laws. That's what's happening back here. That he calls him the pear. That's what le poire means in French. It's basically fat, and disgusting. And these people here, the legislative body, they're shown almost, as fat cats, but also almost like these creatures, these despicable creatures. So how can you make these political commentaries? This is Goya. In the same vein, in Spain, he critiqued the government as well. This is The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters, very famous piece he did, where he says that when man falls asleep, ignorance and folly and treachery, which are symbolized by the animals here, they come to play that we need to wake up, right? We need to be engaged with our government, our society in order to be, humans that contribute. When we fall asleep, we do nothing. We're complacent. We don't have an impact, and that's very bad. He critiqued education. He critiqued war. And again, in these blatant ways that he could get out to people much easier through the printmaking medium than through, let's say, painting. This is Hogarth in England. He shows up in your text. And this is his famous piece, Gin Lane. And within Gin Lane, we see people, this is a commentary on alcoholism and drinking in general. And we've come to Gin Lane and we notice that people are in a very bad state of affairs. We have people pawning off the things that they work with, their tools in order to get money for gin. A mom who's so drunk her baby, woo, there he goes. This guy who's almost dead basically from drinking gin. The coffin shop, right? Doing a good business. This guy who's hung himself up here. The whole town's falling into disarray. It's a critique on the drinking of gin. Hilariously enough, though, he did a companion piece called Beer Street. Notice that everything's great over at Beer Street. People are creative. They're making paintings and contributing to society. So notice that for him, liquor was bad, but beer was okay. So there's a different commentary for every time, I guess. So you go to Beer Street, everything's going to be okay over there. But this is political commentary. It's talking about something about society. As I mentioned before, these are trade goods too. If you think about how prints work, they're cheaper to make. They're smaller pieces. They can be distributed easily. One of the ways that Europe starts using printmaking is that they inherit it from Asia. It is a development that starts in China and Japan because paper is invented there. And the principles of it travel from Asia to Europe as a trade good, essentially. But these are some pieces by Hokusai that you're seeing here, one of the most famous Japanese printmakers around. His piece, The Great Wave, is probably one of the most famous prints that exists. And the style here of the print impacts a lot of European art that you see later. Here's Shige, another famous printmaker from Japan as well. And again, if you look at some European works like Mary Cassatt's Mother and Child, she was an impressionist in Europe. It's basically a style we call Japonism because it uses the Japanese influence um, on the piece, right? And uses that style. So we see how trade good would impact what's going on there as well. And contemporary printmaking, we see a lot of it about kind of wrestling with this idea of the artwork as a unique object. Someone like Warhol, for instance, or Liechtenstein, where they argue, is art, a precious object, or can I make multiple copies of it? Warhol obviously said, I can make copies on copies on copies, and you'll still pay millions of dollars for them. You gotta love that, Andy. So he explores the idea of not just commodity as subject, but if you really think about it, he explores the idea of the commodification of art. Pretty brilliant. Liechtenstein also, again, operated in this area using comics as a subject. So he took a subject that was often thought of as a low subject and elevated to a high subject. So that's another cool kind of conversation. And I also just wanted to briefly show you some contemporary printmakers and what they're doing. One of my favorites is Kiki Smith, who has explored in a lot of ways how do you redefine printmaking for a gallery. She's done a lot of these works with animal symbolism and the idea of animism, religion, which are very interesting, using these kind of sheets of tissue paper to create these ephemeral works that almost seem like they're about to dissolve or fade away, be ripped apart. And then one of my favorite people, there are Swoon, who I gave you some quotes here from her, who talks about how galleries are boring, right? And I don't want to be. I love she calls a gallery a comatorium. She says she doesn't want to be there anymore, so she starts doing prints and installing them on in streets, on the streets, right, in the cities. She primarily works in Brooklyn. And so she does these works where, you're walking down the street and all of a sudden you're, engaging with this print piece that's affixed to a wall and staring at you. So again, how to make this work more public, right? How to take it out to a more wide audience, which to me is the spirit of printmaking in the first place.